right, welcome to Simplify. I'm your host, Staff Sergeant Bonstein, or as I was referred to, Staff Sergeant B. And we'll be with my guest in 1 second. We're going to go over what happened in history on this date. We'll start that first. And on May 19th, in the Marine Corps in 1927, the 11th Marine Regiment, they arrived at Nicaragua for garrison duty. And in the Army in 1945, on the island of Okinawa, the U.S. 77th Division suffers heavy casualties while fighting on the Ishlam Ridge and the second withdraws. And in the Air Force in 1945, some 272 Americans and a B-29 Superfortress bomber strikes the Amsterdam 120 miles from Tokyo. And in the Navy, in 1965, the 30th Naval Construction Regiment activated on Da Nang in Vietnam. And that's what happened on this date and time on May 19th. So my next guest, he came in 1943, served in the Navy. So welcome Chuck with a magazine in 5 rounds. Let's lock and load and meet Chuck Lackyard.
Correct.
All right, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, so let's start out with the basics. Where did you go to boot camp? What year did you go? How old were you?
I went in the first week of May of 1943 to boot camp in San Diego, California. Served my boot training, and then I was transferred to machinist mate school for 16 weeks of training. And after graduating from the machinist mate school, I was shipped up to San Pedro, California, at the receiving station, where I stayed until I got orders to board a tanker, a merchant tanker for Hawaii. And we left on Christmas Day, 1943. And we arrived just about the first of the year at 44. And we stayed at the, I think it was Hickam Field, if I remember that right. And then I was told to report down to the dock and board the USS Manila Bay, a little escort carrier. And I boarded the escort carrier, and we went off of Hawaiian Islands training our pilots. And after that training, we left for our first engagement, which was to, we called it the road back to Tokyo. And we departed the 7th of March and reached Espiritu Santos on the 12th. 3 days later, we joined TF-37 for airstrikes and surface bombardments of Kavieng, New Ireland. And on the 19th and 20th of March, the next month, we cruised between the Solomons, Bismarck, Acapulco, and supported and protected offensives to neutralize the archipelago and the Japanese fortress on Rabaul. Thence we left the 19th of April and steamed to attack the enemy on New Guinea. In New Guinea, we attacked Hollandia, Anatop, and Tamamara Bay on the 22nd of April. During this invasion, the Manila Bay launched and protected all patrols, sent fighter planes and bombers to attack the enemy installations on Anatop, and on May the 4th, she returned to Manus to embark Admiral Felix Stump, who was be our flag on our carrier. The carrier was Division 24. Admiral Stump transferred his flag to the Corregidor on May the 6th, and the following day, the Manila Bay sailed for overhaul in Pearl Harbor, where she arrived the 18th of May. During the loading of 37 P-47 Thunderbolts on our decks, and our sister ship took the same amount of planes on Natoma Bay, we sailed for the Mariana Islands. Steaming to Eniwetok, we reached the eastern approach to Saipan, and on the 19th of June, during the next 4 days, we remained east of the island and in Battle Island as ships and planes from the fast carrier group repulsed the Japanese fleet and the Battle of the Philippine Sea, which was a big battle, as you know. They sunk 3 carriers and about 400 planes. We lost 30 planes in that incident. And then we with that, in staggering losses on the enemy, crippling the Imperial Navy Air Force permanently. On the 23rd of June, Manila Bay came under enemy attack during refueling operations off of Saipan. 2 fighter planes dropped 4 bombs dead ahead of us, and neither bomb hit us or our sister ship. Exploded on the port side. And support further attacks and precautionary patrols were launched. Moved Raymond A. Spencer, later, I'm losing a little bit here.
More about it.
Further attacks and so forth, where they did precautionary patrols. We initiated with the Manila Bay was to launch 4 P-47s that we were ferrying to fly protective cover, which is called CAP, Civil Air Combat Air Patrol. During the next radar screens was clear and contacts. The Army fighters were all launched and took their position on Saipan. This is also some figure that may not be known. We lost about 13,000 Marines on Saipan. The Japanese lost 31,000. And I talked to a friend of mine who was in the Marine Corps, and he said every morning at 8 o'clock, you could set your watch, they'd have a bonsai attack. They just mow them down. They were just committing suicide because they knew that their country wasn't going to try to save them. So that ended that.
Yeah,
and on June the 23rd, Manila Bay came under enemy attack that was a refueling off of Saipan. And let's see if I can go right on down. Manila Bay then went to Pearl Harbor in August. 2 days later, Captain Fitzhugh Lee took command of the ship and the carrier, and we embarked for VC-80. Manila Bay departed on the 15th of September for unit for Carrier Division 24 and Carve Division 24, steaming to Anahuac, reaching Manus on the 3rd of October, began the final preparations for the invasion of the Philippines, of Leyte Gulf, which we were there. We were involved in the largest sea battle on record, the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The first hour and a half, we lost 2 escort carriers and 3 destroyers who sacrificed themselves to save us. And it was a very, very trying time for us, I'll tell you that for sure. And the Manila Bay, on the 12th of October, sailed for the waters east of the Philippines prior to the invasion. Her planes pounded the enemy and ground targets on Leyte and Samar and Silva Island, and launched ground support, spotting, and covering for the strikes. During the amphibious assaults on October 20th, and she sent bombers and fighters to support the ground forces during the initial first few days on Leyte. The Manila Bay cruised east of Leyte Gulf with other carriers and Admiral Stump, Taffy 2 Task Force Unit 77.42, powerful Japanese naval unit converged upon the Philippine area and launched 3 pronged offensive to dive and Americans on Leyte. In the series of masterful and coordinated surface attacks, an American battleship and cruiser force met and destroyed the enemy ships in the Battle of Samar. But that was not 100% true. We were the first ones to engage them. We had 16 carriers left out of 18. And we launched every aircraft we had, 30 to a ship. It must have looked like a swarm of bees coming on Admiral Karuta. Anyhow, we started bombing and strafing and torpedoing, and we made many, many hits. But you couldn't sink the Yamato, which was the largest battleship ever built. And they finally, after that engagement, they did sink it. The engineers figured out they had to go down 10 feet to get underneath the armor. They put 6 of them in her starboard beam, and it's capsized, 3,000 men on board.
Wow.
It
Took a
was
little bit of
horrible
work to
thing.
do.
It was. We finally got it. But it was a terrible thing. But Manila Bay sent 8 plane strike against the powerful targets and lady before sunrise. Subsequently, the planes bombed and strafed retiring enemy ships southwest of Panama Island. A second strike was about mid-morning and pounded the Moagi. In the meantime, however, the Manila Bay turned her planes against a more immediate enemy attack against our ships of Taffy 3. And the Samar was the main island that we were doing this battle of. It's called the Battle of Samar. Running battle ensued during the escort carriers and Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, Taffy 3, and the largest, vastly more powerful surface ships of Vice Admiral Takedo Karuda, Central Force, the self-sacrificing attacks by American destroyers and escorts that prompted the aggressive and increasing torpedo attacks and bomb attacks on strafing of the planes of Taffy 2 and Taffy 3. It contributed to the American victory against all odds. And the Manila Bay launched her 2 strikes during the enemy pursuit of Taffy 3. 2 more, the Japanese retreated. At 8:30, she sent 4 torpedo planes laden with the TBM Avengers and 7-plane escort joined in the desperate fight to launch against the torpedoes against the battleship, probably the Yamato. But they missed their target. The 4th plane launched her torpedo at the heavy cruiser, most likely the Chamico, and hit the ship in her starboard fantail, forcing her into a tight circle. And after that, it was a field day. They just zeroed in, and within an hour, it was on the bottom of the ocean. So it was quite a feat. But that was one of our planes.
All right. On that note, we're just going to take a quick break.
All righty.
All right, and we'll come right back. And
Okay.
World War II veteran who's got a lot of history with him, and we're going to see what he has on the table. So get a cup of coffee and come back and join us.
Left foot, left foot, left foot. No right, lift up. No right, lay up. I left it right, lift up. Left it right, lay up. No right, lay up. No right, lay up. Left it right, lift up. Left it right, lay up. No right, lay up. Left foot, left foot, left foot, left foot. No right, lift up. No right, lay up. I left it right, lift up. Left it right, lay up. No right, lay up. No right, lay up. Left it right, lift up. Left it right, lay up. No right, lay up. No right, lay up.
All right, welcome back to Semper Fi with my host, Chuck Lacklard. And he's going over some historical facts when he fought in World War II, and you were in the Solomon Islands as well. So a little bit more about your facts, but I don't want to shun away from what you did bring up on the counter. I'd like to address some of that in a little bit. So continue on, please. Very interesting what you have.
Okay. After the initial strikes on the Japanese ship, as the Japs broke off the attack and circled Samar, the airstrikes continued. At 11:20, Manila Bay launched 4 Avengers and so forth with 500-pound bombs and 4 bombers from other carriers. They escorted the FM-2 Wildcats. That's the little fighter planes that we had at that time. And the commander, R.E. Fowler, soon joined the planes of Taffy carriers. Soon after 12:30, some 70 aircraft surprised the attack on the retiring Central Force and strafed and bombed through intense aircraft fire. The Manila Bay bombers made a hit and 2 near misses on the lead battleship, probably the Kojonga and Harmutsu. Manila Bay launched her final strike at 12:45, scraping the destroyers and getting 2 hits on a cruiser. Later in the afternoon, the Manila Bay had CAP, which is Civil Combat Air Patrol, intercepted Japanese bombers and fighters strikes 30 miles north of Taffy 2. Her 4 fighter planes broke up the enemy formation and with reinforcements drove off the attackers before they even reached our ships and our carriers. Her planes continued the attack on the enemy ships and followed the next day, laden with rockets, bombs, and her and her Avengers scored 2 hits on the Kinyu and several hits on the Yumura. Both ships sank about noon, and in the Benzanian Sea, I guess that's how you pronounce it. You have to excuse me on these Japanese names. Manila Bay resumed her operations to support the Lady Ground Forces, and on 27th of October, during the ground support air cover, her planes shot down an Akachi D-3A Val. On the 27th, bagged 2 more planes and Oscars. And on the 29th, late in the 30th of October, she sailed for the Admiralty Islands, arriving on the 4th of November. And we arrived at the Coastal Roads, and Manila Bay departed the 10th of December to provide air cover for the Mindanao invasion and convoys. The task force entered Mindanao Sea early in 13th of December, and later that afternoon in the Surigao Straits south of Negros, we encountered enemy aircraft. The fighter planes cover shot down and repulsed most of the attackers with accurate gunfire from the Manila Bay. Shot down 1 kamikaze, and a second kamikaze also went down. During and after the Mindanao landings on the 15th of December, the Manila Bay sent her planes on ground support and cover missions. As troops poured ashore, more kamikazes attempted to break our air cover and crash into our ships. Covering the carrier group, a few escaped the combat air patrols and either were shot down or driven off by accurate gunfire of the ships and aircraft fire. The Manila Bay helped down 3 of the raiders, and her fighters knocked out about 2 more. After recovering her planes on the 16th of December, she sailed via Sugo Sea and reached Coastal Roads at the 19th of December. After a trip to Manus, the Manila Bay sortied New Year's Day, 1945, with ships for the Luzon attack with 5 other CVEs. The provided cover for the whole group. Vice Admiral Jesse M. Ollendorf bombarded and fire support for the group, and direct air cover was for Vice Admiral Daniel E. Barbley and San Fabian Attack Force. The task group steamed to Surigao Straits and into Mindanao Sea and the Sulu Sea, where they turned north for Mindoro Strait. The enemy nuisance and suicide planes began to increase in earnest. On the 4th of January, despite the air cover and so forth, we lost our sister ship was the Omni Bay, and it was a great loss of life in her. And the enemy attacks intensified on the 5th of January. Patrolling fighter planes broke up the morning and early afternoon strikes and shooting down numerous raiders. At 1650, an attack was sent by all hands and general quarters and the Vector Cap Squadron down several enemy planes, and anti-aircraft fire accounted for others. 3 planes got through the patrol and hit the Louisville, the Stutford, and the HMS Australia. Just about 1750, 2 kamikazes above the Manila Bay from the port side. The first plane hit the flight deck and strafed with their machine guns as they were coming in. And I would tell you something that was funny about that. My buddy was on a 24-inch searchlight, and he shined the light on the Jap plane as it was coming in and blinded him. He went to the left. When he did, he went through the flight deck instead of hitting the bridge. He would have killed all the captain and all the officers there and really put us in a mess. But as it was, we were still a mess. It knocked out all of our radar and all of our radio equipment. We had nothing. We were communicating with the plane's radios. That's how bad it was. Jeez. But within about 24 hours, we had temporary power, and we were back to full steering and everything else. But the captain said an officer was on each side of him, and when they scraped, they got both the officers, and he didn't get a scratch.
Is that right?
And then he had this rig put up there with this button I told you on the side of the bridge, and he blew him up in the air, and he landed on all fours and tried to crawl, but the tow bar that they used to tow the planes around fell across his legs. But he hit the button and saved our ship. And it was quite a feat because his seamanship was outstanding. That's about it. In Lingayen Gulf, we lost 14 killed and 52 wounded, and by January 10th to resume full duty. So in 5 days we were sending off aircraft. Lingayen Gulf operations and additional provide air cover for the task force. Her planes flew 104 sorties against the targets in the western Luzon, and they gave offensive close support for the ground troops in Lingayen and San Fabian, and bombed and rocketed the surface and machine gun buildings and attacked and destroying buildings. The Manila Bay departed from the convoy on the 17th of January, steaming towards Leyte. In the meantime, she landed at Ulithi, is where I was taken off and put on a hospital ship. Now, I was the only one that was seriously wounded that lived. They took off the ship. And it took me aboard the U.S., it was a Mars seaplane, the biggest seaplane I ever saw. It was about 100 stretcher cases on it. It gives you some idea how big it was.
All right.
And it had the first JATO pods. When they took off, they hit those JATO pods, and we were in the air and nothing flat. And they flew us to Manus, and then I went in a tent hospital on the beach, and then under a DC-3 plane to go down to, not Lady. We went down to Fleet Hospital 108, which is near Guadalcanal. And that's where I stayed till the 10th of April, and they had done surgery on me and everything and sent me back on a troop ship back to the States. So that's pretty much I can tell you about our activity and actual combat.
All right. Now, when you were setting up, Jeff made a comment, and you brought in your medals. And we were talking right before the show, and I was mentioning that my grandfather had these bottom 3 as well.
Yeah.
And right up there you have the Purple Heart. You just got done talking about that. And you made a comment that I think you favor this one.
Yeah, this is the one that I've got the paperwork here, right here.
I want to.
It's called the Unit Accommodation Medal for Army or Navy and Marine Corps, and that was given to us for the Battle of Leyte Gulf. And this one here is a Combat Action Ribbon, Purple Heart. This is the Philippine Liberation Medal with 2 stars. This is Asiatic and Pacific with 4 stars, and this is American Theater. And wait a minute, I'm sorry, this was the Victory Medal. This is the Philippine Liberation.
All right.
And this one here was given in 1946 by the Philippine government in recognition of all the servicemen that served in the Philippines to liberate her.
You know, one thing that always fascinated me is that the Combat Action Ribbon doesn't rate a medal.
No.
And of all the medals, I think that one should.
Yeah.
That's just my personal belief. You know,
Well, I was told I
you're in
deserve it,
harm's
so
way.
I put it in there.
Well, you're in harm's way, but even get the medal or the ribbon or not, it doesn't rate a medal, which I always found that to be wrong.
And this is one I told you about that a lot of people don't know about, so I brought it down here. It was an ammunition ship that pulled into Manus, and she was laden down with ammunition and armament for you name it. And our ship had a loading party that went over to take ammo back to our ship, and after the first load, they refused to go back. And the officer of the deck said, "You'll be court-martialed." We said, "I don't care what you do to us, we're not going back." Well, 30 minutes later, there was a big flash, and it disappeared from the earth. I mean, it took ships and men, about 350, so they didn't have to argue anymore about going back. But that was one of the catastrophic things, and there's pictures of it blowing up. The second thing was in Pearl Harbor, prior to loading our ship with the P-47s, they were loading landing craft and stuff for the Marine Corps to go to Saipan. And I was walking across the flight deck, and I saw all of a sudden something knocked me down, a gust, and I got up and I saw this huge fireball about 2 miles away from us. And what had happened, they were loading these landing craft with Marines and equipment, and they were welding cables down, and we figured that there was a leaky gas can, and it sparked by the electric welding, and it blew up, and it killed about 350 men.
Wow. I told you that you coming on the show, that 30 minutes was going to go fast. Our time is up, believe it or not. And looks like you barely even scratched the surface, to tell you the truth. I'd like you to thank you for being on the show. I have a Simplified chip for you.
Oh, thank you.
For being on the show. And if you'd like to come on a second time and pick up where we left off.
Well, I'd like to, if you have time, I'd like to say that these two books, right here and here, were made by a man named Blood, William Blood. He was an Air Force pilot, and he also was a commercial pilot after the war. And he wrote these two books, and a friend of mine, Dan McCarthy, who lives in the park where I live, bought and paid for these. This book here, U.S. Aircraft Warfare, was given to me by Admiral Lee's wife, and it's from the Smithsonian Institute. And this picture is of the Admiral. He was captain when I first met him on the ship. He retired as a rear admiral. He's a great nephew of General Lee of the Civil War. And then that plaque over there was given to me by a couple in the park, Mr. and Mrs. Jim and Hazel Yohe. They gave me that as a gift because of what I did for the country. And you've seen the plaque with the medals. And this book here is very old. It's made in about it was started in 1946. It's called Aircraft Carriers.
Boy, that's a tough book to get a hold of.
It's old
Jeez.
and heavy. But anyhow, it's called the U.S. Aircraft Carriers in Action. This was all about the escort carriers, and there's a picture of me again. And but this is all the admirals that we had that was in the South Pacific. And these are some of the action shots that I knew this guy here. He lives in Sparks, Nevada, and I knew it was him by the bald spot on top of his head.
That's how people start to notice me, too.
Yeah. And this is some idea when we're in a typhoon, what it's like. Look at that.
The swell,
You could
yeah,
look off the deck when you were down in a swell and you're looking into blue water. That's 60 feet up off the water. And but we survived it. The captain didn't think it would make it because these were built by Kaiser and they were welded together like the Liberty ships. But we made it, thank God. And this is some of the action pictures of planes coming in for landing. And this one here is a bad one. This is Saginaw Bay, I'm sure. And she had tremendous damage and great loss of life. And this is the guy that had this book before me. I didn't get my book. So He died, and his wife donated it to the association that I helped start. And these are a lot of these guys that are on my ship. But and this one here, this gives you some idea of the damage on the USS Sangamon. Look at that.
Oh, yeah.
And these are all the guys that are going to be buried. And there's one more here. This one here, I didn't know it was in it, but the guys told me at the reunion, said, you know you're in this book? I said, where? They said, right there. Well, it is me. But see, we did, two guys, I don't know how they got their boats or their caps there. We used to dye our caps blue so the enemy couldn't see it from the air.
Right, one of the white hats. Yeah.
But, and that was it. This was when they went into Tokyo, and that ends that book. But the guy that made this book was the executive of Reynolds Tobacco Company. He bought and paid for all these to be printed and delivered to every man on every ship that was in that squadron. And he said it's too hard to collect the money, so he did it on his own.
All right. Well, that will end another episode of Semper Fi. Remember, you have a story. I want to hear it, and I want to share it with everyone else, just like Chuck did. So we'll see you next week. Take care. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks a lot.